Chair, and thanks to each of you for being here today and for your thoughtful testimony. The issue of an open Internet has attracted a lot of attention from a lot of Americans, a considerable amount of public attention. Now, regardless of where any American stands on this issue, whether someone views herself as in support of or against what is commonly known as net neutrality, Americans are sending a consistent message, which is don't break the Internet. Don't mess with it. Don't mess with the most vibrant, expansive, even explosive area of our economy, because it has worked and it's worked well, and it's brought enormous benefits in terms of economic growth to our great country, and it's played an important role in bringing more information, more education, more entertainment, more opportunities generally to people not only throughout our great country but throughout the world. Subjecting the Internet to heavy-handed regulations, the type of regulations that were designed to regulate the railroad industry in the 19th century and designed to regulate Ma Bell in the 20th century could threaten to do precisely that. Unwise regulation in this area would do nothing, I fear, but stifle much needed innovation in Internet service, and would in the process make it harder in the long run for consumers to be able to secure better service and ultimately have a real choice, more choices than they currently have about who delivers their Internet service. Anyone who's ever had an hour-long frustrating phone call with their cable company's customer service representative knows that consumers certainly could use more choices rather than fewer choices, particularly in this area. And the proposed regulations of the sort that we're talking about today would, I fear, do nothing to make the underlying problem better, but instead, I fear, would make it much, much worse. And so I've got a few questions. I'd like to talk to you first, Dr. Eisenbach. Rent seeking is often defined as a process in which someone devotes money and other resources to lobbying government so that they can take in a greater share of wealth that's already been produced without actually generating wealth on their own. Would you agree basically with that definition?
I think that's correct.
Do you think we should be concerned about the possibility that the sort of FCC regulation that we're talking about today will lead to more rent-seeking behavior than it would solve the problems for which it was purportedly designed to solve?
Absolutely, and the FCC has a long history in an unfortunate history in the rent-seeking department. Ronald Coase, who won a Nobel Prize for helping to develop the theory of rent-seeking, won it in part for an article titled The Federal Communications Commission, which was about the lobbying and political influence that went into the allocation of broadcast licenses back during the 1950s and 60s. That same kind of activity, and I spent an unfortunate amount of my time in and around the Federal Communications Commission, and a tremendous amount of activity, as Rob knows better than anyone, goes into precisely that sort of lobbying. And everyone who's paying a lobbyist to be there on all sides of the argument is there defending the interests, their economic interests in these arguments.
And so when government gets involved in picking winners and losers in the marketplace, the winners end up being not necessarily those who provide the best service at the best price to consumers, but rather those with the most effective contacts, perhaps with the best relationships to government decision makers. I'd like to ask you briefly about a point that was made earlier, I believe, by Mr. Burnham. An analogy was made to an air conditioner. Let's take that analogy a step further. Let's explore it a little bit more. Let's suppose that someone installed a particular type of air conditioner that consumed an extraordinary amount of electric power, so much power that it made it very difficult for the electric utility in question to supply adequate electricity to other customers in the area. Would there be anything extraordinary about the electric power company perhaps charging a higher rate for that consumer who chose to use that particular air conditioning system?
No, nor would there be anything wrong with the electric company turning around and saying to manufacturers of air conditioners, you know, our network, our ability to serve our customers efficiently depends on your making more efficient air conditioners. We'd like to give incentives for you to use less energy in the air conditioners that you manufacture. Both of those would be good things and would result in more efficient markets.
And one follow-up to that, if the electric utility company in question decided to get into the business of providing its own air conditioning equipment to its ratepayers, if it did that and then engaged in practices that favored its own system as compared to others, wouldn't antitrust laws be equipped to handle that? And so too here, to the extent that we have internet service providers that start to compete with content providers, if they use their position in the marketplace in an anti-competitive manner, or are antitrust laws not there for that very reason?
Absolutely. That story is called Microsoft and Netscape, and one can easily imagine that story replaying itself in this environment, and one can easily imagine the antitrust laws being responsive to that. One point very quickly on the speed with which regulation versus antitrust can be brought to bear. We are a decade into the net neutrality saga. We do not have enforceable rules. Whatever the FCC does, we won't have enforceable rules for 3 to 5 years, while this round of regulatory gamesmanship plays itself out in the courts. In the meantime, we could have had 5 rounds of antitrust cases. So the notion that regulation is a faster way of getting to the right end, I think, is upside down.
Okay. Thank you, sir. I see my time's expired, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator.